life through sanctifying grace, but to possess my life and to know me as I know myself, to see me face to face, body and soul. And a time will come, Adam, and a time will come, Eve, and a time will come for each one of your children, if you remain faithful, that I will take you from paradise, body and soul, and assume you into heaven to be with me without pain, sickness, suffering, decrepitude, or death coming in between. So at a certain point, when we reach a certain level of holiness, that God would just assume us body and soul into heaven in this original plan that God had for us. We wouldn't be going to heaven through hospitals or dying in our beds, and there wouldn't be cemeteries, because we would just be in there. God's original plan was just going to be taken up, assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. What happened to the Virgin Mary, her glorious assumption body and soul into heaven, is unique to her, but it's simply the first restoration of what God intended originally for each and every one of us. That's why it's not a frightening doctrine. There are many people out there who think the assumption, not in the Bible, weird. Catholics trying to make Mary into another Jesus because Jesus ascended into heaven. But that was God's original plan for all of us. Anyway, that's another talk, the assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But again, to merit heaven, humanity, for humanity to get to heaven, face to face, to see God, we were also, like the angels originally, to be subject to a test. Now, in the garden, the unwritten law that existed was written in our hearts, called the natural law. A law that applies to humans from the beginning, from the time of Adam to the end of the world, because human nature is human nature. And when God created in nature, he simultaneously promulgates a law that governs that nature. The natural law, to sum it up, as Jesus summed it up, as St. Paul summed it up, is to love God with all your mind, body, heart and soul, and your neighbour as yourself. That was the only law, that was an unwritten law in our hearts that existed in the Garden of Eden. But there was another law that God imposed upon Adam and Eve, which is what we call a positive law. Something separate from natural law. A law based on God's will. God said, you see that tree over there? There was two beautiful trees. There was the tree of life, which we were allowed to eat, because the fruit of that tree is what sustained us in our preternatural gifts of impassibility and immortality. If you read Genesis 3:22, that's why we were driven out of the garden, so that we wouldn't access anymore the tree of life, so that we would die as a punishment for sin. You are now subject to nature. You shall die. But there was another tree next to it, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was a beautiful tree, stunning fruit. If it was an apple or not, I don't know. It doesn't have to be an apple. It was a beautiful fruit. We weren't even allowed to touch it. For in that day you shall die the death. You'll die a double death, body and soul. Was there anything wrong with eating that fruit? No. Inherently wrong? No. Was the fruit poisonous? No. Why were we not to eat it? Because God said so. Simple as that. It's a positive law based on his will. There are plenty of positive laws in the past that have existed, like circumcision, the covenant with Abraham. We don't have to circumcise anymore. It's a law given by God for a certain people, for a certain time, for a certain reason, and God can change that law as he sees fit. And circumcision was replaced by baptism. Now, the purpose of this law was the same as the purpose of the law given to Lucifer and all the angels. You must prove your love for me and gratitude for all the gifts that I have given you in order to merit the beatific vision, to see me face to face. Now, back to Lucifer here. There's Lucifer down there burning away, but God allows him and his minions to test humanity, to tempt us. Now, we can just imagine this. Lucifer sees Adam and Eve. And what does he see? God is putting into place The original plan he showed me. Remember, guys? He showed us he was going to create humanity and he was going to make us subject to them. We said no, didn't we, guys? Well, let's get to it. Let's disrupt this plan. If this plan goes ahead, guys, we're going to be even more humiliated. This Adam and Eve, it's from them that the Son, the Word is going to incarnate, it's going to become man, and he's going to be exalted in heaven above us. Now, what can we do to try and frustrate God here? I know. Let's tear them away from the dominion of God and bring them to my dominion, because I wish to be Lord of all creation still. Lucifer still wishes to be Lord of all creation. That's why he wants you in hell, because he wants to dominate you. That's his kingdom down there, and he wants you all down there, so you're subject to him. He wants to still be Lord of all creation. So the plan is, let's get into this garden, seduce Adam and Eve, tear them away from the friendship of God, tear them away from grace, reduce them to the level of nature, and they'll be subject to me. They'll be subject to us. And they'll be in sin. And how is God going to get out of that one? How is he going to join with sinful flesh and become man? This is a good idea, guys. Okay, let's get to it. You know the story. All right? So he comes into the garden and takes the form of a serpent. And it was all Adam's fault, really. No point blaming the woman. Only a weak man does that. All right? No point. I mean, Adam was smart enough and strong enough to deal with anything that Lucifer could throw at him. He knew what God wanted. He knew the law, the natural law, and this positive law. He knew the consequences of disobedience. He had a natural relationship with God. Sure, he didn't see God yet face to face, but he walked with God in the garden. Beautiful. Imagine that. Beautiful, cool summer's day, and he's just walking in the garden and talking with God as a friend, one-on-one, as he's walking through this beautiful vegetation. His wife didn't even have to cook. You know? Food was just so easy to just... they had to work, but work wasn't a chore. Work wasn't a suffering. It wasn't a burden. It was easy and delightful. The only exercise humanity ever had to do was to walk, and they'll always be fit. It's wonderful. Okay? Anyway, so Adam, possessing sanctifying grace, possessing the infused knowledge, was strong enough to rebut any suggestion from Lucifer. So when Lucifer came and whispered in his ear and said, will you really die if you eat that fruit? Let me tell you something, Adam. God is a liar. He's lying to you. He doesn't want you to eat that fruit, because then if you do, you'll know good and evil. You'll have knowledge like God. You'll become like God in knowledge. See, Lucifer wanted to become like God in power. Second person, unite with my angelic nature and make me at your right-hand side so I can be like God in power. It's a lie. Pride is a lie. Lucifer's lied to Adam. Eat that fruit, know good and evil, you become like God in knowledge. He's lying to you. Adam shouldn't have fallen for that lie. But he did. So he's at fault. And when he fell, imagine Lucifer and all his mates down there laughing away. You might think, oh, he only ate a fruit. If I go to the shop, or if I do like St. Augustine once, if you read in his Confessions, St. Augustine stole a fruit. He plucked it from a tree from a next door neighbour. He felt guilty about it afterwards. If you read in the life of St. Abdullah Haddadini, he was once passing through a farm and he just plucked the plant from the ground, one of those type that you can eat straight away. He felt guilty about it afterwards. He had scruples about it, actually. He confessed it multiple times. Right? Oh, they're not serious sins. They're not mortal sins. They're not. It's a minor thing. You know, you don't have to go to confession for that. But with this case, with Adam, it wasn't a minor thing. It was an act of it was an act of radical disobedience and rebellion coming from pride. And in a true sense, it was a mortal sin. It killed the life of grace, the life of God in his soul. Eve fell, she fell likewise with Adam. They're ripped out of the life of grace. The life of grace has departed from them. They are no longer sons and daughters of God. Only in the natural sense, not in the supernatural sense. We no longer participate in God's own life. When we lose sanctifying grace, we lose sonship and the inherent right that goes with that, to inherit God's kingdom, the beatific vision. The punishments that descend upon Adam and Eve are multiple. Instead of infused knowledge, our intellect is clouded by ignorance. Instead of free will operating freely, it is now subject to the wound of malice that is inverted by self-love. When we're meant to be creatures that love outwardly to God and neighbour, our love is perverted and twisted so that we're loving ourselves above all things. Adam does it straight away. It's not my fault, it was her. Passing the buck is because of self-love. He's only interested in himself and lying and trying to blame someone else, his wife. Instead of impassibility, pain, sickness, suffering, and decrepitude comes into the world. Instead of immortality, death comes into the world. We're thrown out of paradise. The law of labour now is imposed upon us, where work is difficult and you earn your keep by the sweat of your brow. The earth is cursed. That doesn't mean it's completely unfruitful. These are not depravities, these are wounds. It's now difficult for the earth to bear its fruit for us. If we're going to get it, we have to work hard for it. With women, pain and suffering in childbirth. And worst of all, we're shut out of heaven. There's no eternal, supernatural destiny for humanity. So when we die, where do we go? The bad will go to hell. They'll go to Lucifer's kingdom. There's Lucifer laughing, ready for them to drop down on him. So he'll be Lord of all these unfortunate humans. What about the good? Between Adam and Christ, are there going to be any good? There will be good, but only out of God's mercy. In God's strict justice, the punishment is swift and he could have left it there. That's it. I'm sorry. You knew the deal. You knew the terms of the contract. You knew the terms of the covenant. You breached your part. You know what the consequences are. That's it. Stay there. Boom. When God said, in that day you will die the death, he didn't say at that moment, but I might give you a second chance. He didn't say that. I guarantee you if he did, we would have gone out of our way to blow it, relying on the second chance. He didn't offer a second chance when he laid down the covenant conditions originally between himself and Adam. So God could have left us there and that's it. No one could complain. All the children of Adam would be born spiritually bankrupt. Of course, they aren't personally guilty of the sin of Adam and Eve, but they inherit the consequences of it. In the same way, if your dad, for example, was a billionaire, if everything goes normal, you'll inherit his riches. But one day if he goes down to Star City Casino, has a bit too much to drink, and he blows it all at the roulette table, it's all gone. He leaves poorer than us. Nothing. Hasn't even got enough money for the taxi fare. You're going to suffer the consequences of that. You're going to be left bankrupt and impoverished because of the sin of your father. And Adam did that to all his children. From that moment to the end of the world, he deprived them of a treasure far greater than any billions of dollars. Sanctifying grace, the participation in God's own divine life. Creative participation. Not just creative participation, God dwells in our souls, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's what we lost. That's an infinite treasure. The world doesn't see that these days. The world is blind. The world's just worried about the latest interest rate rise or the unemployment figures or the budget surplus or the value of the Australian dollar or all these things. We don't even think about spiritual things anymore. That's how impoverished we are today. Anyway, so God could, as I said, God could have left us there. That's it. Lucifer will be laughing, as I said. But straight away, and this is unmerited, mercy, grace, forgiveness. When I say unmerited, that's something of great significance. Nothing we could ever do could entitle us by way of right to what God would promise next. Purely out of his goodness and mercy and forgiveness, he promises a redeemer. Saying to Lucifer, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Various translations here, different versions. He shall crush your head and you shall bite his heel. That's one version. Another version is she shall crush your head. Whatever version you take, there's going to be a new man and woman. It's going to come and undo the victory you've just won, Lucifer. And you're going to be crushed in the end. There's going to be an enmity between you and that woman. That's enmity means hatred, war, conflict. In other words, you've got control of this woman now, Eve. But there's going to be another woman you will not have control over. You're going to have this enmity between you and this woman is because she is going to be free of your kingdom. And I'm going to make sure of that. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. You remember Lucifer, in this hypothesis, Lucifer's thinking with his mates, we're going to stop this God-man coming into the world and reigning as Lord of all creation. And we're going to corrupt the human nature so that God can't unite with it. He will refuse to unite with a corrupt human nature, corrupt, sinful human nature. He won't do that. It's not appropriate for God to do that. We know God. He won't do that. But God's going to outsmart their plot.